Did you miss us? Did you miss us? Hello, Canucks fans, and welcome to another emergency edition of Canucks Conversation. Good morning! Good morning, Canucks fans. We don't get to say that very often. I'm looking early. Our YouTube live chat already has a lot of our regular listeners in it, so it's good to see these people come out on a Saturday morning. So, last night, the Vancouver Canucks trade JT Miller. Now, we expected that one, Harm. We expected that one to come down at some point. It was unfortunate that it came down on a night where you, me, and associate editor of Canucks Army, Tyson Cole, were all at the same show at Rogers Arena. We were all at the Shane Gillis, I don't want to call it a concert, the same comedy show. So we were all tied up. And during about the, back half of his set, I get a little notification on my phone that I was late too, because of course I had my phone on Do Not Disturb. The Vancouver Canucks trade Danton Heinen, Vincent Desharnais, Melvin Fernstrom, and the first round pick that was clearly burning a hole in their pocket to the Pittsburgh Penguins for Marcus Pettersson and Drew O'Connor. And that's what we're going to break down today on this emergency edition of Canucks Conversation. Now, Harmon, we can't talk about one trade without talking about the other. So J-Pat and I broke it down yesterday, but let's start with your initial thoughts on the Miller trade.
Yeah, so the return on paper may have looked underwhelming for a guy who scored 100 points last season, but honestly, considering the corner they'd backed themselves into, I thought it was a good trade for them. Think about all the factors working against the Canucks. Number one, he turns 32 in about 6 weeks and is signed to a contract that has another 5 years left after this season. He's been playing banged up this season, and he plays a sort of grueling power forward style that may not age well. So when you look at his contract, it carries significant long-term risk, even with the salary cap going up. He has a full no movement clause, so he was able to dictate exactly where he wanted to go. You couldn't negotiate with the whole league on JT. He's having a down year, especially defensively. The whole league knew about his rift with Elias Pettersson. Everybody knows that he's a complicated personality to fit in your locker room because of how fiery and hot-headed he can be. And the whole league knew that you had to move one of JT or Pettersson. So I didn't have a problem with the initial trade at all. In fact, I thought the timing of it was important to get it done sooner rather than later. The more I'd been thinking about this debate of, do you trade him now ahead of the deadline? Do you potentially wait till the summer to see if the offers improve a little bit? I was increasingly convinced that they needed to rip the Band-Aid off. He looked checked out on the ice at times. Even just seeing him every time this year in the locker room, he was in a grumpy mood. He didn't look right. And I'll tell you this, having covered JT for 6 seasons, he wasn't like that before. To me, it's not fair to the rest of the team to have the whole Pettersson-Miller storyline and that rift hanging over the team. I think it's a chance for a fresh start for everybody to kind of try to move on from that. I should clarify, I don't think it's a guarantee that Miller leaving necessarily fix all of the locker room dysfunction, because it wasn't all his fault, but it gives you at least a chance to reset the vibes, reset the leadership hierarchy. And when you look at the return, right, a first, Hedl, Mancini, you didn't have to retain or take a bad contract. In return, it wasn't the best return overall necessarily, but considering the tough circumstances, I think they managed it pretty well. And the other key is you can't judge this trade looking at what JT necessarily was in the past, that, 90 to 100 point centerman. Remember, when trades happen, you have to look at what this player is going to be in the future. And of course, what they've done in the past is often a helpful indicator. But in the case of JT, again, turning 32 in 6 weeks, I, considering the circumstances, thought it was a pretty sharp trade, given how weak of a negotiating position they were in.
I agree with you, and that's what I said yesterday, so I'm not going to repeat myself. But one thing that Frank Saravalli said yesterday when we were talking with him on the emergency show about ripping the Band-Aid off was this idea that if you waited, you weren't going to get a real chance to see what Elias Pettersson looks like without JT Miller. And you run out of time to trade Elias Pettersson if you reach July 1st. That no trade clause kicks in. I think that's a really important aspect of this, is the Elias Pettersson factor in all of this. And hey, he was asked about it last night following the game against the Dallas Stars about the added pressure. He's ready for it, he said. He said he wants that pressure, and he knows it's coming. And I was catching up on the game, and from what I saw, Elias Pettersson played a pretty good game last night. Gets kind of a nothing primary assist, but picks up a point. But I think he was controlling play well. I think he outchanced the opposition. by a pretty significant margin when I read the stats this morning. So again, fine first game for Elias Pettersson, but this is what's really interesting. The Rangers fans in all of this. Now, I don't know if this is my Twitter X algorithm telling me or showing me tweets that Canucks fans are liking, but the only thing I've seen on my feed is Rangers fans really upset about this trade in the terms of they traded JT Miller before his prime, let him play his prime years elsewhere, and somehow acquired him when he was out of his prime. Again, that was one tweet I saw, and really I have seen just a lot of Rangers fans upset with the idea of paying Mika Zibanejad, Vincent Trocheck, and JT Miller all into their 30s and not really liking that trade from that perspective of they think JT Miller is just maybe, again, not to use the term washed, but past his prime. I saw some Rangers fans a little bit upset about this trade.
And they should be, to be totally honest with you. I had to write trade grades for The Athletic right after it was made, and I gave the Canucks a slightly higher trade than the Rangers. I think this is reckless risk for the Rangers to take. Here's the thing. If the Rangers were cup contenders right now, if you looked at them and they were sitting third place in the Eastern Conference, you look at the roster they have and you're thinking this year, next, we're going to be Stanley Cup contenders, then fine. I think that's a good move to add a guy who could give that lineup a serious jolt. The issue with the Rangers is they might not even make the playoffs. They're far below the bar right now. They've got a lot of teams that they need to catch up on. And so there's a risk that JT, like, he could still be really productive this year. He could still be really productive next year. But are you, as the Rangers, actually positioned to take advantage and capitalize on those prime years and contend for a Stanley Cup? And to me, I'm not a believer in the Rangers core. I don't think they can be in the inner circle of top 5 or 6 contenders this season or next. And because of that, I think they're taking on way too much long-term risk because, as you noted, they have an aging, expensive core that's locked up. When you're talking about $22 million committed to Zibanejad, Miller, and Trocheck, who are 3 talented players, but all over the age of 30, in the case of Zibanejad, already rapidly declining. And the problem I see with the Rangers is, yeah, they have good pieces on paper, but they're way too reliant on goaltending. They're way too reliant on special teams. Their issue has been 5-on-5 play. JT Miller, his 5-on-5 play hasn't been very good this year. Now he could rebound, but to be honest, and this isn't even so much about JT himself, it's more, I don't think the Rangers, given how their window appears to be closing, should have rolled the dice on another over 30 player with a risky contract.
Nathan Lee in the chat saying, I live in New York City. All my New York City Ranger fans range from either not liking this trade to skepticism. Nobody outright likes it. But we're not here to talk about the JT Miller trade. We talked about it yesterday. And of course, folks, subscribe to the Canucks Army YouTube channel. Harmon and I are live Monday through Friday on Canucks Conversation at 2 p.m. live here on the Canucks Army YouTube channel. And of course, wherever you get your podcasts as well. So make sure you subscribe to the channel. Lots of content comes out on this channel. And of course, check out CanucksArmy.com and Harmon's grades over at The Athletic. Okay, Harm. Speaking of grades, I asked everyone, and I feel like let's get to this now. We're going to talk about this second trade that they made. Let's leave JT in the past. We'll talk about that, all together on Monday. We're actually hoping to have Peter Baugh back on the show, Athletic New York. Hopefully we can have him on Monday to talk about this deal. Let's get to our poll question, which I posted. It was an informal poll question. Of course, Jacob's ready with it. Technical producer Jacob Lazar. I asked Canucks fans how you grade the Canucks' work as a whole over the past 24 hours. So both trades, take everything into consideration. How do you grade it? A, B, C, or F? Overwhelmingly, with 58.5% of the vote, people said B. There was 30.5% of people that said C, 6.3% that said F, and 4.8% that said A. Harmon, I am probably at a C plus or a B minus, probably a B minus, and it becomes a B plus if they re-sign Marcus Pettersson. That's my take on the whole ordeal, because I look at it and say, okay, you did good with the JT Miller trade. You and I both agree on that. But then you use that asset, which we aren't really talking about, is a pretty good asset, and if the Rangers miss and it becomes a 2026 pick, you're all of a sudden in that territory of the Ottawa Senators, Vegas Golden Knights, where it's like, okay, what is that pick going to become? Or maybe it wasn't the Vegas Golden Knights. I can't remember who traded. You know what I'm talking about. It was the Avs, right?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Had to correct myself there. You're in that territory of having that unprotected pick, and that's a really valuable asset. So what could you have done with that next year? A little bit of risk there from the Canucks perspective, but at the end of the day, Harm, the first round pick, this good asset that they got for JT Miller, was traded to get out from under your mistakes. And I know people give this management group praise for that all the time, myself included sometimes. But I give them less praise when it's mistakes that they signed 3 months ago. When you're trading Danton Heinen, Vincent Desharnais, that's good to get out of that money. Absolutely. It's great to get out of that money, gives them some cap space and flexibility for next year, and of course makes the team better this season when you get Drew O'Connor and Marcus Pettersson back in return. Undoubtedly, they got better last night. So I give them kudos for that, but I don't think this trade can be an A if you're really being honest with yourselves. These trades cannot equate to an A grade, even if they re-sign Marcus Pettersson. I think it's a C+, B- right now, becomes a B+ at best if you're able to re-sign Marcus Pettersson.
Yeah, I think that's a very fair, very appropriate range. To me, it's an incomplete just because this trade hinges so heavily on not just can you re-sign Marcus Pettersson, but what's the price of that contract look like? It has to be reasonable, right? The risk here is, and I imagine the Canucks are intent and made this trade with the idea that, okay, we're going to take a serious push at re-signing him and feel reasonably confident about those odds. But think about it from the player's standpoint. If I'm Marcus Pettersson's agent, if I'm Marcus Pettersson, I'm thinking you just gave up a haul to get me. The optics in your market for your organization are horrible if I walk. I have all the leverage in contract talks now. You better pay me what I want. And that's not to say the Canucks are necessarily going to get rinsed on contract extension talks, but you are starting from a weaker negotiating position leverage-wise compared to the players' camp. So that's an interesting dynamic to watch, and that's why it's not just can they re-sign him, but the price of that contract has to look reasonable. I think we can all agree if he walks in for agency, it's a disaster. I don't imagine that's going to happen. But it's not just do they re-sign him? It's what does the actual price of that deal look like? And the other thing to keep in mind is they've been rumored to be in on Pettersson for months. So I can guarantee you that the front office has likely done their research into contract comparables and estimated the ballpark of what his market value should be.
Someone's gonna have to fact check me on this. I think I might have only told you and Irfan Gafar privately. I think I might have reported it, or maybe I came out and said, "Oh, this isn't a report." It was. I knew for months that they were really, really interested in Drew O'Connor. I think I said it on the show. Did I say it on the show, or did I just say it to you?
I don't recall that at all, to be honest.
No, I don't recall it either. And I obviously talked to J-Pat about it, though, because he mentioned it on Rinkwide last night when they were breaking down the trade, that he had known that the Canucks had been in on Drew Connor for a couple months.
So I told J-Pat, I'm going to scroll up in my texts with Irf, because I know Irf's response was when I was like, hey, I just got a tip that they're really interested in Drew O'Connor, and he said he plays for the Penguins and he's a big winger. Of course they like Drew O'Connor. And it was a funny text exchange that I had with Irf. But anyways, okay, maybe I didn't report it publicly. But yes, they have liked Drew O'Connor for a while. Of course, they liked Pettersson for a while. Harmon, let's focus on Drew O'Connor for a second. Big winger, 6'3", size you can win with. He's going to be a really good middle six winger, I think, for this team. And he's kind of the afterthought in this trade, but he does make their forward group better.
Oh, he's a legit piece. He can absolutely fly. He's terrific on the forecheck. He can be frustrating in terms of his finishing ability. He's the type of player who can create a lot of chances, but maybe isn't the best finisher. But yeah, he's going to be that trusted, speedy, get in on the forecheck guy that I think is going to fit well with the way this Canucks team likes to play. And he's an important part of it, part of this too, where he broke out last year a little bit offensively. Now, keep in mind the Penguins had weak left-wing depth, so he was getting opportunities further up the lineup that he may not necessarily get in Vancouver. Whereas this year he's having a bit of a down year offensively, but he's going to bring a legit, distinct identity, and I really like him as a bottom six winger.
I wonder if he's friends with Sidney Crosby. Maybe that incentivizes Crosby to force his way into Vancouver.
Yeah, pen another letter.
I get on it. There's 500 people watching this show. I'm guessing 130 people know the bit that we're referring to. If you want to see more of our bits, got to be a better way to say that. Join us.
Yeah, expect.
Join us Monday to Friday. Canucks Conversation live here on the Canucks Army YouTube channel at 2 p.m. Over 500 people watching. Thanks for joining us today, folks, for a second emergency episode. Emergency-ish, we should say. It's like 10 o'clock in the morning. Okay, Harm, as a whole, we look at these moves, and like we said, again, I give it a C+, B-, pending what happens with Marcus Pettersson. But I ask you this, when you look at this trade, like, does it not, I don't want to say upset you, but if we're being honest with ourselves, you and I have been talking for a while now about this idea of buying at the deadline and how we were saying this probably isn't the team to buy for. This is what this is. Like, Marcus Pettersson was a target we were talking about at the start of the year when we thought they would be, near the top of the Pacific and a potential reinforcement for the team. Right now, they're still in the playoff hunt, of course, but we were talking this week about how it was, okay, maybe don't go out and use a first-round pick for a rental. I know maybe it's a little bit different because they got this first-round pick and they're still going to have a first-round pick for this draft, but, like, am I wrong here? Does this not feel like a buyer's move?
Yeah, that's a thought that came to mind when they made this move too. Is I'm sure they are going to try their best to extend him and traded for him with the idea that he's going to be part of the long-term future in Vancouver. But in immediately trading for two rentals, my thought was, I wonder if they're still trying to salvage this season. The idea of trying to contend right now, which is also interesting because by offloading the Heinen and Desharnais contracts, they've still got cap space ahead of the deadline.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't even know if their buying is necessarily over. Would I be? Let me put it this way: would you be shocked if the Canucks start to get on a bit of a roll that ahead of the deadline they're looking to buy more to add reinforcements?
I wouldn't be surprised. The only way I would do it if I was management was if Elias Pettersson steps up. Like, if he keeps this up where it's this, and I know he played a good game in game one of the JT Miller-less era, but it was still just one assist, and it was kind of a garbage time assist. So the only way I'm buying it comes down to the same conversations we had when Miller was still on this team, Harm, was there's no sense buying if both Miller and Pettersson aren't going at the same time because you're not going anywhere in the playoffs. So I think some things would have to happen for me to say, yeah, of course you add to this team. I really like Filipino. I've said this for a while now that I think he has some more upside, and I think Patrick Alvin spoke with the Canucks team reporter Olivia McDonald, and I think he said the same thing, that they view Filipino as having more upside. Filipino got off to a really good start this season, and again, we'll see. He only played 10 games last year for the Rangers, of course, but there's all those injury problems for Filipino, but I think some things have to go right before I say, okay, yeah, add to this team. Could I see it happening? Yeah, but I wouldn't do it if the big thing that happens isn't Elias Pettersson is back.
My question too is, with that Rangers asset, especially given the potential of what else you could have combined it with, I would have wanted to see them, like, in my mind, and I don't know how many people agree with the sentiment, but in my mind, I was treating this as a lost season as far as Stanley Cup contention. They'll make the playoffs, even when this team was at its lowest, and we were saying they gotta trade JT Miller, they gotta do something to alter the core. I was always saying they're still likely going to make the playoffs. That stance hasn't changed. They're going to be a playoff team in all likelihood. However, I still think this is a lost season as far as Stanley Cup contention. And so in my mind, when they acquired that initial haul for JT Miller and you got that first round pick, in my mind, I was really excited to see, well, they've got 6 months between now and next offseason to sort of turn over every rock, find the best possible opportunity to turn that draft pick into the best possible long-term fit for your organization. Now, I'm not saying Pettersson won't be a good fit long-term for the organization, but you made the trade essentially 2 hours after getting the pick. So I don't think there's really a world where you turned over every rock, looked at every opportunity. And in my mind, again, it wasn't just ahead of the deadline. In my mind, it was about building the team to be a contender for next year and sort of using the offseason and summer as an opportunity to look at potentially going big game hunting. So that's just as far as opportunity cost. There's always going to be part of me that goes, what if, as far as what other opportunities could have been out there. And again, that's not to say that Pettersson won't work out here. I'm a fan of the player, and I'm sure we'll dive into that. We have to dive into that. But that was a thought that came to my mind too, was did their incentive and motivation to keep the team competitive now prevent them from being able to explore potentially better opportunities and better long-term fits for next season?
And that's the worry I have too. Again, that's what I'm saying when I say this is a buyer's move. That's probably the only real criticism I have when it comes to this individual trade. And again, this idea of, they got out from their mistakes. Okay, great. They signed those mistakes 4 months ago. So you don't get credit for that, in my mind. You don't. Before we close out, Marcus Pettersson, the player, you've talked about him for a while. What are the Canucks getting in this player?
Super steady defensive D-man. He's never going to be flashy, but he's really effective. He's somebody you can trust and shut down minutes. He's 6'4", so he's tall, but he's lanky, right? He's wiry. He's the type that in Pittsburgh there at times have been conversations around, well, premier power forwards, can they sort of win battles at the front of the net around him? So yeah, he's got that. You look him up on Hockey DB and go, 6'4", 6'5". He doesn't play like it. He's a light defenseman. He's a rangy defenseman. He skates well. He's typically, and this is an interesting part of the Pettersson conversation as far as fit, he's typically been at his best complementing an offensive defenseman in Pittsburgh. Whether it's been Erik Karlsson, whether it's been Chris Letang, whether it's even been John Marino when he was on the Penguins, that's something to keep in mind. He's an excellent penalty killer. He's got a decent first pass. He's got reasonable puck skills. He's also got enough subtle ability in the offensive zone that he's not going to take anything away from what you're trying to accomplish as a 5-man unit offensively, right? Sometimes we talk about defensive D-men and you look at their underlying numbers and it's like great defensive metrics, but their offensive play driving metrics are subpar. They're below average. That's not the case with Pettersson at all. In fact, they're pretty decisively above average. So that's a really good thing. He's a left side defenseman, but he can play the right side if necessary. I think he's a very good player. The only question I have is how Pettersson and Hronek will necessarily mesh together if they end up playing on, let's say, a second pair. Think about it. Both of them are used to being the complementary defenseman on their pair, right? Like Pettersson's typically been second fiddle to a Karlsson or Letang, where he's a really crucial part of being a defensive anchor of that pairing, but he's not the main play driver, right? And Filip Hronek, same thing. He's typically played second fiddle to Quinn Hughes, where he's an essential part of that pairing, but he's not the main driver of it. So Pettersson and Hronek, they're both two very good defensemen, so you expect them to be able to figure it out. But I wonder how they're going to fit, as far as neither one of them is used to being the main driver of their pairing. And in the case of Pettersson, while he is skilled enough with the puck to have a decent first pass, he's not a dynamic puck mover necessarily.
Okay. Drew O'Connor, he plays big. I like Drew O'Connor, and there's someone in the chat. Where did it go? Again, we're not going to read out the chat too much on an emergency episode, but folks, if you like us reading your comments, we have a segment on the regular show called Anyone Else. So 2 p.m. every day, come join us Monday through Friday on the Canucks Army YouTube channel. We have a segment called Anyone Else where we just read listener comments. This one from Karen Versation, of course, who's a regular listener of the show. Who is going to replace Miller as an A? My guess is Garland would be well-deserved. I would say it's either going to be Garland, Myers, maybe Brock Besser. I would say it's going to be Garland if I was a betting man. Correa Alec on Instagram said, dare I say O'Connor is the next Dakota Joshua? And Van Delay 460 on Instagram said, Joshua, Sherwood, O'Connor. Hopefully with these three, we can fill the void of Miller's physical play. Thank you for the interaction, folks. We appreciate it. We appreciate everybody commenting. There's a lot of conversation in the chat right now about Elias Pettersson, and I don't understand how people can. I get it. You might be annoyed by people hating on Elias Pettersson, but like the pressure's on. Starting today, starting yesterday, the pressure is on Elias Pettersson. It's been on him all season, but like it's ramped up now. They traded away the guy that Pettersson was having issues with, and again, this isn't all on Miller. This isn't all on Pettersson, but like there is going to be added pressure on Elias Pettersson, whether you like it or not. I get it. If you love Elias Pettersson and you want Elias Pettersson to succeed, of course, if you're a Canucks fan, you want Elias Pettersson to succeed. But if fans are skeptical of that and are worried about that, I get it. And again, as I said off the top of the show, Harm, these next few months, down the stretch of the season, Elias Pettersson needs to find his game. There's still going to be teams that think they can get more out of him ahead of the draft. So the Canucks are going to have the option to trade him before that trade protection kicks in on July 1st. So as much as we talk about Miller, as much as we talk about this second trade that they made with the Penguins, like the pressure is on Elias Pettersson starting yesterday.
It's not just the on-ice part either. It's leveling up as a leader. That's an area where Quinn took that step, right? Yeah. As a leader in terms of his focus, in terms of his dedication, the obsession to his craft and to level up individual skills and become the best version of himself. And ultimately, Pettersson hasn't matched that. He hasn't come close to matching that. He's shown so much elite potential early in his career. But one thing I will say is going back to even the last management regime, so not even this one, I remember having conversations with one person in the front office, and this was around the time that they had originally bridged Pettersson instead of going long term. And one of the concerns that was shared to me as far as why they bridged him is rather than just going long term, was they weren't entirely convinced that, like, they wanted to be in a wait and see mode as far as seeing just how dedicated Pettersson was to his craft, to leveling up a lot of the intangibles, a lot of the leadership aspects. They were sold on the player in terms of his ability. They weren't necessarily sold on the player in terms of his leadership, the obsession with getting better. And at the time, I remembered hearing that and just like not really understanding it, right? But now, seeing the lack of progress over the last few seasons, you can understand why the last management regime sort of had some of those concerns. And that's why, to me, it's not just, can you get back to being that 90-point two-way centerman that we know he can be, but also you got to level up your preparation, your practice habits. You got to step up. There's going to be a massive void in the locker room as far as like leadership and being a voice with JT leaving. Like there's going to be an opportunity for certain guys to step up. There's a massive void. Pettersson needs to take the reins and lead from that perspective too. It's not just with his on-ice play, even though that's essential too.
All right. Good stuff, Harm. We'll be back tomorrow to talk about, again, we're going to talk about this again. Not tomorrow, excuse me. Today's Saturday. We'll be back on Monday to break all this down, and 2 games to break down as well on Monday's edition of Canucks Conversation. There's over 650 of you now. We hope to see all of you on Monday. You can find us here on the Canucks Army YouTube channel at 2 p.m. live, and of course wherever you find your podcast. The show name is Canucks Conversation. For my co-host Harman Dial and our technical producer Jacob Lazar, my name is Dave Quadrelli. Thanks so much for listening to an emergency edition of Canucks Conversation. Canucks Conversation is live Monday through Friday every weekday at 2 p.m. over on the Canucks Army YouTube channel. Make sure you like, subscribe, and interact in the YouTube live chat every day.